Nadia's dream had always been simple, to have a family. She and her husband, Omar, had been married for 6 years, but their journey toward parenthood was filled with heartbreak. Miscarriages, failed treatments, and endless prayers had left them feeling hopeless. Every time Nadia saw a mother cradling her baby, she felt a pang of longing so deep it was almost unbearable. When Nadia discovered she was pregnant again, she was cautious but hopeful. She prayed daily, asking for a safe pregnancy and a healthy child. Omar, ever the optimist, told her everything would be fine this time. But even he couldn't shake the strange sense of unease that lingered throughout her pregnancy. Her pregnancy was unusual from the start. At first, everything seemed normal. But as the months passed, Nadia realized something was different. The baby didn't come at the expected time. By the 9th month, when most women go into labor, there was no sign the baby was ready to be born. Doctors assured her the baby was healthy, but Nadia couldn't help but worry. "Why is this happening?" she asked Omar one evening, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "Maybe she just needs a little more time," Omar said, his voice gentle. "Our baby is special." By the 11th month of her pregnancy, Nadia felt like she was living in a nightmare. Every day was filled with physical discomfort and emotional strain. Her mother-in-law, Salma, whispered superstitions about curses and evil eyes, while her own mother, Layla, insisted that God was testing her faith. Finally, after months of waiting and uncertainty, the day came. Nadia went into labor late at night, and Omar rushed her to the hospital. The delivery was long and painful, but when it was over, Nadia held a beautiful baby girl in her arms. "She's perfect," Omar said, tears streaming down his face. Nadia smiled, exhausted but overjoyed. She named the baby Amira, meaning princess, because she was their miracle, their long-awaited blessing. But their happiness was short-lived. As the nurses cleaned and examined Amira, Nadia noticed something strange. A faint buzzing sound filled the room. At first, she thought it was just the hospital equipment. But the buzzing grew louder, and soon, black flies appeared. The nurses froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. One of them swatted at the flies, but they kept coming, their numbers increasing by the second. "What's going on?" Omar asked, his voice shaking. The flies formed a dark cloud around the baby, their buzzing so loud it drowned out all other sounds. Nadia tried to get out of bed, desperate to protect her child, but her body was too weak. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the flies began to fall to the ground. Each one burst into a tiny puff of black dust, leaving no trace behind. The room fell silent, except for the baby's soft cries. The nurses exchanged nervous glances. One of them hesitated before handing the baby back to Nadia. "She's fine," the nurse said, her voice trembling. "Just rest now." Nadia held Amira close, her heart pounding. She had no idea what had just happened, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Bringing Amira home should have been a joyous occasion, but the strange incident at the hospital lingered in Nadia's mind. Omar tried to reassure her, insisting it was just a bizarre, unexplainable event. "Our baby is healthy," he said. "That's all that matters." Nadia wanted to believe him, but her unease grew with each passing day. Salma moved in temporarily to help with the baby. While Nadia appreciated the help, she often found her mother-in-law's presence overbearing. Salma was deeply superstitious and insisted on performing rituals to ward off evil. She placed talismans around the house, burned incense, and muttered prayers under her breath whenever she held Amira. "These are just precautions," Salma said. "You can't be too careful with a baby like this." "A baby like this?" Nadia asked, her tone sharp. "She was born after an unusual pregnancy," Salma said. "And the flies? That wasn't normal." Nadia glared at her. "There's nothing wrong with Amira." But deep down, Nadia wasn't so sure. That night, after Salma had gone to bed, Nadia and Omar put Amira in her crib and went to sleep. Nadia was exhausted but restless. She tossed and turned, unable to shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. In the middle of the night, she woke up suddenly. At first, she didn't know what had disturbed her. Then she heard it, the faint buzzing sound she had heard at the hospital. Her heart raced as she turned toward the crib. What she saw made her blood run cold. Amira was floating above the crib, her tiny body surrounded by black flies. The buzzing was louder than ever, filling the room like a swarm of angry bees. Omar! Nadia screamed, shaking her husband awake. Omar sat up, his eyes widening as he saw the scene before him. What is that?" he stammered. Before Nadia could respond, the flies vanished. Amira gently floated back into the crib, and the room fell silent. Salma burst into the room, alarmed by the commotion. When she saw Nadia holding Amira and crying, she demanded to know what had happened. "She was floating," Nadia whispered. "And the flies, they came back." Salma's face darkened. "This child is not ordinary," she said. "You need to protect her." The next morning, Salma called Omar aside. "This baby is cursed," she said. "You need to do something before it's too late." Omar looked conflicted. "She's just a baby, Mama."
"How can you say that?"
"I've seen things like this before," Salma insisted. "Evil spirits sometimes attach themselves to children. We need to cleanse her." When Nadia overheard their conversation, she was furious. "Amira is not cursed," she shouted. "She's our daughter, and she's perfect just the way she is." But Salma wouldn't back down. She insisted on bringing a traditional healer to the house. Nadia refused at first, but Omar, desperate for peace, convinced her to let the healer come. The healer arrived the next day. He was an elderly man with a long beard and piercing eyes. He carried a bag filled with strange objects, herbs, powders, and small carved figures. "This child has been touched by something unnatural," he said after examining Amira. "We must cleanse her." Nadia watched in silence as the healer set up a small altar in the living room. He lit candles, burned incense, and began chanting in a language she didn't understand. The buzzing returned. At first, it was faint, but it grew louder as the healer continued his ritual. Flies appeared, swarming the room. The healer's chanting faltered as the flies surrounded him. His eyes widened in fear. "This is no ordinary curse," he said. "It's powerful, too powerful." Before anyone could react, the healer let out a scream and collapsed to the floor. The flies vanished, leaving the room eerily quiet. Salma looked pale and frightened. "What have we done?" she whispered. Nadia couldn't take it anymore. She called her mother, Layla, and told her everything. Layla arrived the next morning, furious with Omar and Salma. "You should have called me sooner," she said. "This isn't something a healer can fix. We need God's help." Layla insisted they take Amira to the church for prayers. Omar reluctantly agreed, though Salma protested. "This isn't your decision," Layla said firmly. "We're doing this for Amira." The church was a place of peace and hope, but as soon as they entered, Nadia felt the air grow heavy. The pastor, Elias, listened carefully as she recounted everything that had happened. "This child is special," Elias said, "but there is something dark attached to her. We must break the bond." Elias asked them to lay Amira on the altar. He began to pray, his voice strong and steady. As he prayed, the buzzing returned, louder than ever. The flies appeared, swarming the altar. The congregation watched in horror as the flies formed a thick, black cloud. Elias didn't waver. He continued praying, his voice growing louder. "These flies are not of this world," he said. "They are messengers of darkness. But they have no power here." The flies grew more aggressive, but Elias didn't stop. Finally, he turned to Omar. "Where did this baby's blanket come from?" Omar hesitated. "It was a gift," he said. "From my ex-fiancé." Nadia's eyes widened in shock. You kept something from hers? I didn't think it mattered, Omar said. Elias nodded. The blanket is cursed. It's the source of all this. He took the blanket and doused it in holy oil. As he prayed over it, the flies swarmed the cloth. Then, suddenly, the blanket burst into flames. The flies disappeared, and the air became clear. Back at home, the atmosphere was different. The house felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. Amira giggled and cooed, her little face glowing with happiness. Salma apologized to Nadia, tears in her eyes.
I was wrong, she said.
Please forgive me. Nadia hesitated, but eventually nodded. Omar also apologized, promising to be more honest and supportive. From that day on, the family worked together to protect and nurture Amira. She grew up happy and healthy, free from the curse that had once surrounded her. And Nadia learned an important lesson. A mother's love is the strongest protection of all.